The sun hung low over Valencia Grove, casting long shadows across rows of citrus trees as a warm breeze carried the scent of ripening fruit through the dry Arizona air. To an outsider, this was nothing more than another struggling farm, its land cracked and thirsty, its owner just another weary, single mother trying to hold on to what little she had. But appearances were deceptive. Elena Ramirez wiped the sweat from her brow as she checked the irrigation lines, her worn leather work gloves caked with dust. Her faded flannel shirt and scuffed boots told a story of long days under the sun, but her posture, always alert, always aware, hinted at something more. She wasn't just a farmer. Not long ago, she had been one of the most formidable K-9 handlers in covert operations, a ghost who worked in the shadows, tracking high-value targets across unforgiving terrain. Her team had been legendary. Her 3 Belgian Malinois, Shadow, Ghost, and Phantom, had never failed a mission. And now, instead of chasing fugitives across the mountains, they were watching over a quiet patch of land in the middle of nowhere. For the past 3 years, Elena had worked to build a life here, free from the world she once knew. But old instincts never died. They only waited. And tonight, those instincts whispered that something was coming. Elena crouched near the fence line, adjusting a water valve when she spotted it, a black SUV rolling past on the county road, the 3rd time this week. She didn't react, didn't turn her head. Instead, she casually wiped her hands on her jeans, but her mind was already processing. Same tinted windows, same slowed speed near her property, same hesitation before disappearing down the road. Surveillance. Sloppy surveillance, but surveillance nonetheless. Behind her, the dogs moved. Not frantically, not playfully, but with an eerie precision. Shadow flanked left, Ghost held center, and Phantom took the far right. Their pattern was seamless, silent, and invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Elena didn't need to speak. She had trained them for years. They understood. Something wasn't right. She stood, dusting off her jeans, and took one last glance at the SUV before it disappeared over the ridge. Whoever was inside was watching her, testing her. They had no idea they were the ones being watched in return. The farmhouse was small but sturdy, built for function over charm. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and aged wood. At the kitchen table, Maria Ramirez, her 12-year-old daughter, sat with her tablet, doing homework. Her dark brown eyes flicked up as Elena entered, instantly catching the shift in her mother's expression. "They're getting bolder," Maria murmured, setting her tablet down. Elena arched a brow, suppressing a proud smile. Her daughter had inherited her sharp mind, her ability to read the room. She saw patterns like her mother did. "What did you see?" Elena asked. Maria swiped across her screen, pulling up a map of the valley, their valley. "The Hernandez family sold their farm yesterday." She tapped the red dot on the screen. "Way below market value." Elena exhaled slowly, setting her coffee down. Another one. The Lost Diablos cartel had been acquiring land across the Sonoran borderlands for months, either through business deals or more persuasive methods. What they wanted wasn't just land, it was access. Elena had spent her career reading between the lines, identifying patterns before they turned deadly, and something about this wasn't adding up. "4th cartel vehicle to pass by this morning," she reported, sitting down beside Maria. "They're testing our response, establishing patterns, just like tracking a target." Maria nodded, her young face serious. She understood. "We could sell," Maria said after a moment, though her voice lacked conviction. Elena studied her daughter's face. She was still young, too young to have to worry about cartel threats and tactical responses. But she was also smart enough to understand that this wasn't just about money. "This isn't about the farm," Elena murmured, brushing a hand over Maria's dark hair. "This is about what runs underneath it." She reached for a map pinned to the far wall, tracing a line with her fingertip. "Have you noticed?" she asked. "They're only targeting properties along the old mining trails." Maria frowned, then her eyes widened as realization hit. "Those trails lead through the mountains," she whispered. "No border patrol checkpoints, no surveillance systems. A perfect smuggling route." Elena nodded, watching as her daughter pieced it together. The cartel wasn't just buying land. They were carving out an entire pipeline. And her farm? It was the last piece of the puzzle. A low growl rumbled from the doorway. Elena turned just as Phantom, the most silent of her dogs, shifted his weight. His ears pricked, his muscles tensed. He had detected something. A moment later, the distant sound of engines rumbled through the valley, not passing by this time, coming closer. Elena set down her coffee with deliberate calm and walked to the window. 3 black SUVs were turning onto her gravel drive. Maria sucked in a breath. "Elena!" She reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently, reassuringly, but her eyes were already scanning the scene outside with the precision of a soldier preparing for war. She turned to Maria, her voice steady. "Stay inside. No matter what happens, whatever you hear, stay inside." Shadow, Ghost, and Phantom had already taken their positions. Their stillness wasn't fear. It was calculation. They were waiting. Elena stepped onto the porch just as the first vehicle rolled to a stop. The morning sun reflected off the custom Range Rover, the unmistakable emblem of Miguel Cortez, the cartel's regional commander. He hadn't sent enforcers this time. He'd come himself. A mistake. Because Miguel Cortez believed he was the one hunting tonight. He had no idea that he had just walked into the den of a predator far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Elena Ramirez stood on her front porch, her fingers curling slightly at her sides, steady but ready. The Arizona heat shimmered off the black SUVs idling in her driveway, their dark-tinted windows reflecting the glare of the late morning sun. She knew this was coming. It had been a slow, creeping inevitability, like storm clouds rolling over the desert. The cartel had spent weeks watching, testing, circling like coyotes around wounded prey. But Elena wasn't wounded. She wasn't prey. She was the predator they didn't see coming. Shadow, Ghost, and Phantom held their formation, their stillness deceiving. To the untrained eye, they were just well-disciplined farm dogs, but every muscle in their bodies was coiled, their breathing measured, their eyes locked onto the approaching figures. And then the car door opened. Out stepped Miguel Cortez, his reputation preceding him like the sharp scent of gunpowder before a shot is fired. He wasn't just another cartel lieutenant. He was the regional commander, the one responsible for orchestrating the cartel's expansion into Arizona. And today, he had come to deliver his message personally. "Mrs. Ramirez!" he called out, adjusting the expensive watch on his wrist. His voice was smooth, almost amused, as if he were speaking to an old friend instead of someone standing in the way of his empire. "A pleasure to finally meet you." Elena didn't respond right away. She let the silence stretch, let it weigh on him. Because silence could be just as powerful as a threat. Miguel took another step forward, his polished boots crunching against the dry gravel. His 2 enforcers flanked him, a younger man with military posture and a scar along his jaw, and an older one with sharp eyes that scanned the property, cataloging weaknesses that didn't exist. "Beautiful place you've got here," Miguel continued, gesturing toward the citrus trees swaying gently in the breeze. "Rich land, good history. Must be hard keeping it up all on your own." Ah, there it was. The opening move. The polite veneer of concern barely hiding the sharp blade underneath. Elena finally spoke, keeping her voice neutral. "It's been in my husband's family for generations." Miguel smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Yes, and change is inevitable. Valencia Grove, this whole valley, is evolving. New opportunities are coming. Smart folks see that and adapt. His gaze flicked to Maria's bicycle leaning against the porch railing, to the old rocking chair where Elena's husband used to sit before he left for his final mission and never returned. "And the ones who don't adapt?" Elena asked, tilting her head slightly. Miguel's smile widened. "They tend to get left behind." Maria watched from the window, her small fingers gripping the wooden frame. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her mother had told her to stay away, but Maria couldn't look away. She saw the way the men moved, how they spread out just slightly, a calculated formation, not an attack stance, but close. She saw how Miguel didn't look at the dogs, didn't acknowledge them. A mistake, because he should have. Maria's pulse quickened. She had never seen her mother like this before, not the way she was now. To the outside world, Elena was a quiet widow, a farmer. But standing on that porch, facing down cartel enforcers, she looked like someone else, someone dangerous. For the first time, Maria understood. Her mother wasn't just strong, she was something else entirely. Miguel pulled a sleek business card from his pocket, holding it between two fingers. "Consider my offer, Mrs. Ramirez. 3 days. We'd hate to see anything unfortunate happen." He flicked the card onto the porch steps, where it landed face up in the dust. Then, with a final lingering glance toward the house, he turned and walked back toward his SUV. His enforcers followed. They weren't expecting an answer now. They thought they'd planted the seed of fear, that the next time they came back, she'd be ready to surrender. They had no idea they had just made their worst mistake. The second the SUVs disappeared down the road, Maria burst through the door. "Mom, we have to leave." Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. We should take the deal. We can start over somewhere else, somewhere safer." Elena turned, studying her daughter carefully. Maria was smart, observant, but she was still a child who had never known the full weight of the world her mother once lived in. "This isn't about money, mi amor," Elena said gently, stepping forward. "They're not just buying land, they're buying access." Maria's brows furrowed. To what? Elena pulled down the old map from the kitchen wall, spreading it across the table. She ran her finger along the abandoned mining trails, the ones that stretched through the mountains like veins of forgotten gold. "They're taking properties along these routes," she murmured. "Cutting a path that avoids border patrol, surveillance, everything. These aren't just cartel thugs, Maria. They're trained." Maria swallowed, looking at the map. The red X's her mother had drawn, the patterns forming. "Then why not tell the police?" Elena exhaled slowly. "Because some of them are already bought." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Maria knew what that meant. She had always believed that law enforcement, the government, they protected people like them. But now she saw the truth. It was up to her mother. It was up to them. That night, Elena didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the old scar on her wrist, the one from her last mission before she walked away from the CIA. A mission that never should have gone wrong. A mission that cost her husband his life. She had promised herself she would never go back, never let Maria see that side of her world, but the world had come for them anyway. Outside, Shadow, Ghost, and Phantom moved in the moonlight, their silent patrol forming an invisible barrier around the farmhouse. They sensed the shift, the change in the air. Something was coming, and this time, Elena wasn't running. She reached for the faded leather case hidden beneath the pantry floorboards, clicking it open. The contents gleamed dully in the dim light, a suppressed sidearm, a tactical knife, an old comms unit, tools of her past, tools she would need again. Maria appeared in the doorway, small but strong. "You're not selling, are you?" Elena glanced up, her expression unwavering. No. Maria nodded. She had known the answer before she asked. Then she walked forward and placed her small hand over her mother's. Then let's fight. The night was thick with silence, not the kind that brought peace, but the kind that listened, that watched. Elena Ramirez stood in the dim light of the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Her mind was elsewhere. Outside, her farm stretched under a vast, moonlit sky. The citrus trees rustled in the night breeze, casting long, restless shadows across the dry earth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, a lonely, haunting sound. It should have been just another quiet night. But Elena had spent too many years reading the space between the silences, and tonight, something was off. A small movement near the tree line, a flicker of something that didn't belong. She didn't react, didn't move. She just watched, and she wasn't alone. From the darkness, 3 sets of sharp, intelligent eyes watched too. Shadow, ghost, phantom. The dogs remained completely still, coiled with quiet awareness, their breathing measured, their ears locked onto the unseen intruder. Elena took a slow sip of coffee. Let them think they were unseen. Let them think they were in control. They weren't. A faint vibration hummed against the wooden table. Maria's tablet. Elena turned, watching as her daughter sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, completely focused on the satellite map glowing on her screen. "They're getting closer," Maria murmured, barely glancing up. She swiped across the image, zooming in. Rows of tiny red dots marked movement. Elena nodded, setting her coffee down. "They've been watching for weeks, testing entry points." Maria hesitated, then looked up. Her eyes weren't afraid. "Why this farm, Mama?" Elena exhaled slowly, reaching for the old weathered map she had pinned on the wall months ago. She spread it out on the table, pressing her fingertips to the paper. "It's not about the farm," she said, tracing a slow line along the roots that stretched far beyond Valencia Grove. Maria leaned closer, studying the faded markings. "The old mining trails," she whispered. "Exactly," Elena murmured. They weren't just buying land. They were buying roots. Maria's brows knit together. "But the mines closed decades ago. Why would they care about old tunnels?" Elena tapped the map again. "Because those tunnels don't lead to the past. They lead to the border. A perfect network. A hidden artery of forgotten paths that wove through the desert, avoiding checkpoints, surveillance, and satellite tracking. It's a highway," Maria realized, "and we're sitting on the last missing piece." Elena met her daughter's gaze. She was catching on, faster than Elena had hoped. "They want control of these roads, and they're getting desperate," Elena said quietly. "Which means whatever they're moving through these tunnels, it's big." The mining trails had been abandoned for more than 40 years, but Elena knew better than to believe in abandonment. "Come on," she said, pushing away from the table. Maria hesitated. "Where are we going?" "To see what they're hiding." Minutes later, they were outside, moving carefully through the shadows. No flashlights, no unnecessary noise. The dirt beneath their boots was dry, cracked, but Elena's memory was sharper than time. She remembered this land as if she had mapped it herself, and in a way, she had. Shadow, ghost, and phantom led the way, their steps precise, their eyes scanning, reading the landscape. They weren't just dogs. They were trained reconnaissance. As they neared the outer edges of their land, Maria's breath hitched. The trees thinned. The ground sloped downward. And there, hidden beneath the brush, was an entrance. An old mining tunnel. A tunnel that shouldn't have had fresh tire tracks leading inside. Maria swallowed. "We shouldn't be here." Elena crouched, touching the dirt near the entrance. Recent movement. Heavy vehicles. "We need to know what's coming," she murmured. "And we need to know before it's too late." Elena reached into her jacket, retrieving a small handheld drone no bigger than her palm. "Stay here," she whispered, pressing the controls. The drone lifted silently, its tiny camera feeding real-time footage to Maria's tablet. The grainy black and white image flickered, adjusting to the darkness of the tunnel. Then, movement. Maria gasped softly as silhouettes appeared on the screen. Men, vehicles, equipment, and large industrial crates. Elena narrowed her eyes. Not drugs, not weapons, something else. The drone's night vision adjusted, zooming in, and that was when she saw it. The symbols stenciled onto the crates. The markings weren't cartel. They weren't local. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "That's military." Elena's pulse slowed. Not just military. Government. The realization settled deep into her bones. This wasn't just a smuggling operation. This was something bigger. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. Elena carefully retracted the drone, pulling it back before the men inside the tunnel could detect it. Maria's hands shook as she clutched the tablet. "Mom," she whispered, "what do we do?" Elena stood, her jaw tightening. She had spent years running, years hiding. But there were two kinds of people in the world. Those who ignored the shadows, and those who became the light. She turned to Maria. "We prepare." Maria looked up, eyes wide. "For what?" Elena met her gaze. "For war." They moved fast. Back at the farmhouse, Elena pulled open the floorboards, revealing what she had buried long ago. A tactical case. Inside, high-powered surveillance gear, encrypted comms, field equipment she swore she'd never touch again. Maria watched in silence, realization settling in. This wasn't just about defending their home. This was about stopping something before it started, before it spread. Elena pulled her old comms device from the case and pressed a single button. A secure frequency. An old friend. A familiar voice crackled through the static. "Elena, I was wondering when you'd call." Jack Torres. The only person who had ever understood what it meant to disappear. "We have a problem, Jack," Elena said, "and I think it's bigger than either of us realized." A beat of silence. Then, "Send me what you have. I'll get a team ready." Elena exhaled, closing her eyes for half a second. She had spent 3 years pretending to be a farmer, but a ghost never truly disappears. And the hunt was about to begin. The night was thick with tension, the kind that curled at the edges of the air waiting to explode. The desert stretched out in eerie silence, but Elena Ramirez knew better than to trust the quiet. Somewhere out there, beyond the orchard and past the fence line, they were watching. And tonight, they were coming for her. She had known it the moment she saw the mining tunnel, the military-marked crates, and the unmistakable precision with which the cartel was moving. This wasn't just about smuggling anymore. This was a full-scale operation, and she was in the way. From the window, Maria's small face was pale in the glow of the tablet screen. Her fingers moved across the controls, switching through camera feeds, watching every inch of the property. She wasn't supposed to be awake. She was supposed to be sleeping, tucked safely away from the darkness that crept closer. But how could she sleep when she knew what was coming? "Movement at the south perimeter," Maria whispered, her voice tight. Elena's pulse remained steady. She didn't need to look. She had already memorized their approach patterns. 3 vehicles, 2 entry points, a 6-man team, all trained, all expecting an easy grab. They had no idea they were stepping into a nightmare. Elena turned to Maria, brushing a hand through her daughter's dark curls. "Remember what we talked about?" Maria swallowed. If you don't check in every 4 hours, I call Jack. Good girl, Elena whispered. Maria hesitated, then grabbed her mother's wrist. Mom, please. Elena paused. In that moment, she saw everything in her daughter's eyes. The fear, the strength, the trust. She knelt down, pressing her forehead to Maria's. I will come back, I promise. And then she was gone. The dogs moved first. Shadow, Ghost, and Phantom melted into the darkness, vanishing between the trees. Their specialized gear made them invisible to all but the most trained eyes, and even then, no one would see them until it was too late. Elena stepped onto the porch, rolling her shoulders, settling into the familiar rhythm of the hunt. The first SUV rolled to a stop at the gate. A low, static buzz crackled through an earpiece as Miguel Cortez's voice filtered through. Mrs. Ramirez. Elena didn't move. She let the silence answer for her. A pause, then a chuckle. This is the last time we ask nicely. The last time. Elena allowed herself a small, cold smile. They really had no idea who they were dealing with. From the tree line, a faint rustling, a silent shift in the shadows, the signal. She exhaled slowly. It was time. Elena stepped off the porch, her movements slow, measured. All right, she called out, raising her hands just slightly. Let them think they had won. Miguel stepped forward, his enforcers close behind. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world shifted. A silent command, a breath of stillness. And then, chaos. Shut. Phantom struck first. A blur of motion, an explosion of force. He took down the nearest enforcer before the man even registered the attack, his weapon clattering to the dirt. Ghost and Shadow followed, silent and lethal, weaving through the confusion like shadows given form. The enforcers panicked. They weren't used to fighting an enemy they couldn't see, and that was exactly how Elena wanted it. She moved fast, faster than any of them expected. A sharp strike to the throat, a twist of an arm, a stolen weapon. One down, a flash of steel, two down. Miguel turned, shouting orders, but no one was listening, because by the time they realized they were the ones being hunted, it was already over. Miguel's breath came hard and fast as he hit the ground, dirt sticking to his expensive suit. Elena crouched beside him, pressing the cold steel of a weapon to his temple. Let's talk, she murmured. Miguel gritted his teeth, his pulse wild. You have no idea what you're doing. Elena leaned in, her voice dangerously soft. I know exactly what I'm doing. His jaw clenched. You think taking me out will stop this? You think... I don't need to take you out, Miguel. Elena's lips curled into a smirk. I just need to make you afraid. She stepped back, allowing the moment to settle, allowing the realization to bloom. She had never been the one in danger. They were. The interrogation was swift. It didn't take long for Miguel to start talking. And what he revealed? It changed everything. The mining tunnels weren't just for smuggling, they were part of something bigger. An operation that reached far beyond the cartel, touching organizations with resources and influence far more dangerous than any local enforcer. And the military crates? They weren't weapons. They were data, encrypted servers, black market intelligence, secrets that weren't supposed to exist, secrets that people would kill to protect. And that was when Elena realized the cartel was just a pawn. The real enemy? They hadn't even revealed themselves yet. The cartel thought they were the biggest threat in this valley. They weren't. Something else was lurking behind them, something bigger, something that was about to learn why Elena Ramirez had never lost a hunt. She pressed her comms device. Jack, we have a problem. A pause. Then, how bad? Elena's gaze flicked toward the desert horizon. Big enough to change everything? She exhaled, rolling her shoulders. Get ready, this is just the beginning. The desert night stretched wide and endless, a silent witness to the chaos that had just unfolded. Miguel Cortez lay where he had fallen, hands bound, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The enforcers who had come with him were either unconscious or restrained, their weapons stripped, their communications cut off. Elena Ramirez stood over him, her expression unreadable, the weight of the revelation sinking into her bones. This wasn't just about smuggling roots. It wasn't just about a cartel expanding its reach. This was bigger. This was about intelligence, classified, encrypted, and in the wrong hands. The cartel had been moving data, not drugs, using the old mining tunnels as a corridor for something far more dangerous. From the farmhouse, Maria's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Mom, I accessed the files from the tablet. The markings on those crates, they're linked to ghost accounts. Some of them go back almost 20 years. There was a pause. This isn't just cartel money, it's government money. Elena's pulse remained steady, but she felt the shift. She had spent her life following trails that others couldn't see. And this trail? It led to something deeply buried. She crouched beside Miguel, leveling her gaze with his. "Tell me about the shipments." He hesitated, his arrogance cracked but not broken. "You think taking me down changes anything? You're a ghost, Ramirez, a relic of an agency that abandoned you." Elena didn't flinch. She had heard worse, but she also saw something in his eyes, fear. Not of her, but of the people behind this. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Miguel continued, his voice lower now, almost desperate. "You think I'm the top of the chain? I'm nothing. The real power? They don't need guns. They don't need to threaten. They just erase you, like you never existed." The words settled, cold and heavy, but they didn't shake her. Elena had spent years fighting in the shadows, moving in the spaces where men like Miguel thought they were untouchable. She knew better. "Then let's bring them into the light," she said simply, before standing and pressing a call signal on her comms. Across the valley, miles away, Jack Torres answered. "Tell me you've got something." Elena glanced at the crates, at the markings, at the broken pieces of a puzzle she was beginning to see. "It's worse than we thought." Within the hour, the farmhouse had transformed. It wasn't just home anymore, it was a command center. Surveillance feeds flickered across multiple screens, displaying satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and the movement of cartel supply chains. Miguel had been taken to a secure location, but the real work was just beginning. Jack had called in reinforcements, trusted contacts, former intelligence officers, people who had spent years hunting the kind of ghosts that moved money in the dark. Maria, despite her mother's protests, had taken a central role. She wasn't just a kid anymore. She had grown up watching Elena work, learning how to see things most people missed. Now, she moved between the screens with sharp focus, highlighting connections. "Look at this," she said, pulling up a list of offshore accounts. "Every time a shipment moves through the mining tunnels, there's a simultaneous transfer in one of these shell companies. But that's not the scary part." She tapped another screen. "Some of these accounts, they belong to U.S. officials," Jack swore under his breath. "You're telling me this isn't just cartel-backed? There are people inside our own agencies running cover for them?" Elena nodded. "That's exactly what I'm saying." She had suspected corruption, but this was on another level. This was organized, methodical. An entire shadow network operating within legitimate institutions. It was why the cartel was untouchable, why they had moved so aggressively into the valley. Because they weren't just running shipments, they were running information, intelligence leaks, political leverage, entire blackmail operations disguised as smuggling. Maria looked up. "If we don't stop this, they'll keep using these tunnels. They'll keep expanding. And no one will know until it's too late." Jack rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Then we cut them off before they have a chance." He turned to Elena. "We have enough to make a move, but we need evidence that sticks. We need their buyers, their handlers, The people pulling the strings. Elena didn't hesitate. Then we let them come to us. The plan was simple in theory, but dangerous in execution. The cartel had been expecting an easy expansion. Instead, they had walked into a war. The only way to expose the deeper network was to force their higher-ups to react. And to do that, Elena needed to make herself the bait. Within hours, the valley was in motion. Shadow, Ghost, and Phantom ran silent patrols along the perimeter, their tracking collars feeding back real-time data. Hidden motion sensors had been placed along the mining tunnels, mapping every movement. Elena had staged a scene, leaking just enough information to make it look like she had been compromised, that she was ready to negotiate, to hand over her farm in exchange for safety. And they took the bait. At exactly 2:14 a.m., an unmarked convoy rolled onto the property. Not cartel vehicles this time. These were high-end, government-grade, bulletproof, silent. The kind that belonged to people who never showed their faces in courtrooms, never had their names printed in reports. This was the real power. Elena stood in the center of the dirt road, hands in her pockets, Shadow at her side. She didn't need to see inside the tinted windows to know who was watching her. But she wasn't the one in danger. They were. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a man stepped out. Not Miguel's men, not cartel muscle. This man was different, clean-cut, professional, the kind of person who signed papers that made people disappear. "Elena Ramirez," he greeted, his voice smooth, practiced. "We should talk." She tilted her head slightly. "We should." But she already knew how this ended. Because while they had been watching her thinking they were in control, they had missed something crucial. They were standing in the center of a tactical perimeter. Every camera was live. Every satellite feed was recording. And Jack, Maria, and an entire task force were listening. Elena smiled. "You should have stayed in the shadows." And then, before the man could move, before he could reach for the phone call that would order her erasure, the valley erupted with the sound of sirens. The game was over. But for the people in those cars, the nightmare had just begun. The sun was setting over Valencia Grove, painting the Arizona sky in hues of deep amber and soft violet. The air carried the crisp scent of citrus and earth, a quiet contrast to the storm that had just passed. Elena Ramirez stood on her porch, one hand resting on the worn wooden railing, the other wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. The battle was over, at least for now. The cartel was crippled, their network exposed. The men who had hidden in shadows, who had pulled strings from behind layers of deception, were now in custody, facing the consequences of a world that no longer looked the other way. The operation had unraveled far beyond the valley, reaching into places Elena had once thought untouchable. But no one was untouchable. Not forever. She had proven that. Maria stepped beside her, the quiet hum of a tablet screen reflecting in her dark eyes. The young girl had changed over these past weeks in ways Elena wished she hadn't needed to. There was an understanding there now, an awareness that could never be unlearned. Maria had grown up watching her mother from a distance, never truly knowing the weight Elena carried, the world she had left behind. Now she knew. But knowing hadn't broken her. It had made her stronger. "They're still processing evidence," Maria murmured, her voice steady but thoughtful. "Jack says they're finding more every day. Some of the people funding this, they aren't just cartel, they're officials, politicians, people with power." Elena nodded, unsurprised. Power always found a way to protect itself, to disguise corruption beneath a veneer of legitimacy. "They'll try to rebuild," she said softly. "People like them always do." Maria frowned. "So what happens now?" Elena glanced down at her daughter, at the determination set in her face. Maria had asked that question once before, years ago, when her father never came home, when Elena had made the choice to leave behind the life she had built in intelligence work. The answer had been different then. Back then, she had told Maria they were going to find peace, that they would build a life far from the weight of danger and deception. But peace had been an illusion, a fragile thing that crumbled the moment the real world pushed against it. She had learned that hard truth, and now Maria had too. Now. Elena exhaled, watching as shadow, ghost, and phantom prowled the edges of their land, ever vigilant, ever ready. Now we stay ready, because there will always be people who think they can buy silence, who think they can own fear, but they forget something important. Maria tilted her head, waiting. Elena smiled, but there was no softness in it. They forget that there will always be people willing to stand in the way. Maria studied her mother for a long moment, then looked back at the house, their home. For so long, it had been a sanctuary, a quiet place where she had felt safe. Now she understood. Safety wasn't about running from the fight. It was about knowing when to stand your ground. "We're not leaving, are we?" she asked. Elena shook her head. "No, mi amor, we're not." That night, the farmhouse was quiet, but not in the way it had been before. This wasn't the quiet of fear, of waiting for the next move, of holding breath in the dark. This was the quiet of resolve, of knowing that no matter what came next, they were ready. Maria curled up on the couch, finally allowing herself to sleep, while Elena remained awake, watching the night shift outside. She had spent years convincing herself that she had left the world of intelligence behind, that she was done being a soldier, a handler, a hunter. But some instincts never faded. Some battles found you, no matter how far you ran. Jack called just before dawn. His voice carried through the static, weighted but certain. "It's official," he said. "This whole operation, it's bigger than any of us thought. We've got international ties, hidden accounts leading all over the world. It's going to take years to sort through it all. But Elena, without you, this never would have come to light." She leaned against the counter, pressing the phone to her ear. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "We both know that." Jack hesitated. "And what about you? What's next?" Elena glanced out the window at the first slivers of morning light breaking over the valley. The same valley she had once dreamed would be her escape, her quiet life. That dream was gone now, but something else had taken its place. "I stay," she said simply. "And if they come back?" Jack's voice was knowing, almost amused. Elena smiled, looking at her dogs, her silent warriors, always watching, always waiting. "Then we remind them why they lost the first time." The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the land. Valencia Grove had changed, but it was still standing. And so was she. The cartel had thought they could take everything from her, that she was just another name to be erased. But they had underestimated the wrong woman. Justice wasn't about taking revenge. It wasn't about striking first. It was about making sure that the people who thought they could move unseen, who thought they could bury their crimes, never felt safe again. And as long as Elena Ramirez drew breath, they never would. The story of Elena Ramirez is more than just a tale of action, strategy, and survival. It is a testament to resilience, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. At its core, this story speaks to the power of standing against corruption, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It reminds us that the greatest battles are not always fought with weapons, but with conviction, intelligence, and the refusal to back down in the face of oppression. Elena's journey is that of a woman who tried to leave her past behind, to build a life of peace for herself and her daughter. But the world she walked away from found her again, forcing her to make a choice, to run or to fight. And in choosing to fight, not just for her land, but for the truth, she became more than just a mother or a former operative. She became a protector, a force for justice in a world where power often goes unchecked. At its heart, this story is about legacy, the lessons we pass down, the values we uphold, and the impact we leave behind. Maria, once innocent to the dangers lurking beyond their home, learns the most important lesson of all. Strength isn't just about power. It's about knowing when to stand your ground. Elena does not seek revenge. She does not act out of anger. She acts out of necessity, out of love, out of the unshakable belief that some lines should never be crossed, and that those who cross them must be held accountable. In a world where darkness often operates in secret, this story reminds us that light will always find a way in, that the greatest warriors are not those who seek battle, but those who are prepared to fight when the world needs them most. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.